Hello, welcome back to the David Watson podcast. For the first podcast in what has seemed an age, I took a couple of months off for no particular reason, just felt like having a rest. But I'm still loving the podcast, and today was no exception. I had the wonderful opportunity to speak to Julian Raven, and we had a long, deep conversation about American politics, his troubles with the Smithsonian Library, and a little bit of religion. And we're going to get back to that at a later date because he has so much to talk to us about. But first, enjoy this episode. Thank you. Welcome to the David Watson podcast. Thank you very much for sorting out some of my technical problems and issues for me as I got caught completely off guard. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, David. It's great to be with you, and great to be with you on the other side of the pond.
One of the things when I looked through kind of your bio, I guess for want of a better term, is, and I hope it makes sense after I've asked the question, but sometimes the cliche is like, well, where would you say it begins? Where would you start the story? My question is, where would you say it ended?
Well, depends which story we're talking about, because I am, if it's my litigation, I am still in it.
Well, let's start with that.
Well, if it is the story, the Smithsonian legal battle that's been going on for close to 9 years, over 9 years now, actually, that I am in my third lawsuit. So I'm still litigating and fighting for the rights that I was obviously deprived of. And that whole story opened up a whole other aspect of the journey that now I am fully involved in once again. So
you see the issue, don't you? There is a multiple of chapters that follow through on your life. So give people, explain the litigation before and kind of where you are. How it began, if you like.
The lawsuit was started in 2016, and that was regarding a painting that I had submitted to the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. to be on display at the inauguration of it was President-elect Trump. And I came up against fierce institutional bias, just anti-Trump animus from the director, who turned out to be an Australian woman by the name of Kim Sayet, who personally called me and basically tried off the record to denigrate and disparage and just vent her rage, because this was post the election, the first election of Donald Trump, and the people that despised him before the election were enraged after he won. And this woman, it seemed that she was taking the opportunity to call me up personally. This was the director of the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., calling up the artist to bawl me out, basically. So that was such an outrageous experience that after I recovered, I then embarked on which is now 9-year journey, because basically she taunted me at the end of the conversation after I rebuffed all of her arbitrary personal objections that were not written standards of portraiture consideration, to basically hold your painting up against and see whether it qualified or not. It was all personal objections. She ended the phone call and it was an 11-minute argument. She ended the phone call in a high-pitched Australian accent saying, "I'm the director of the National Portrait Gallery. Your application will go no further. You can appeal it all you want." And then she hangs up the phone. And so when she taunted me with the appeal, that has been the driving force that has led me into 3 lawsuits now this issue has mushroomed as a result of her actions.
So her issue with you submitting a portrait for Donald Trump, or of Donald Trump, was just that he won?
What? No, just repeat the question, please.
So I'm trying to understand, because there is this weird thing, and they call it Trump derangement syndrome. But you submitted a portrait, is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
And she was upset because it was Donald Trump and he'd won.
Well, she can't say she's upset. She just couldn't help herself.
Mm.
She couldn't contain herself, and I think sought the opportunity to basically call up the artist and vent, because and take gleeful pleasure in that, because of the way the conversation went. And the application was supported. I had campaigned. I had been involved for the full entire campaign season. I had, in 2014, Donald Trump, as a New Yorker, had expressed interest in running for governor of New York State. And myself and folks that I knew were like, well, this could be an answer to the political chaos that we deal with in New York State. And as a business person, he could bring, business sanity. He had name recognition, but he couldn't get the support from the Republican Party. So when he stood up to run in 2015, I thought it was very interesting. That's a whole journey and a whole story, how I painted this portrait, how I was inspired to paint it in the summer of 2015, when there were 17 Republican candidates on the stage and 4 or 5 Democrat candidates. And yet I knew at that point the experience that I had shown me that he was going to win. I'd paint this 7-foot by 15-foot portrait, massive painting, a prophetic or prescient portrait predicting his win, painting him as president. People thought I was crazy. People that I knew, nobody was interested in supporting Trump at the time. And they mocked and ridiculed even then. A lot of those folks changed. And just to let your audience know, today I am not a Trump apologist. I'm actually in my 3rd lawsuit. He's actually one of the defendants due to what is going on with the Smithsonian Institution today and the executive branch's incursions into the institution. Is a whole other aspect to the lawsuit, which we may touch on. But the point with Kim Sayet and her condition was obvious, that after I submitted this publicly supported application with politicians from all over New York State, representatives of upward of 200,000 people, it wasn't just me saying I'd like to display, and it was a tribute display for the inauguration of that historic candidate who had won in such a remarkable way. An unelected, non-political person wins the presidency of the United States. This is a major historic event, just for history's sake. But she couldn't. She was so hostile, and it was, and if you want to put it under the category of Trump derangement syndrome, she fit perfectly. And her bias was a violation of law. Her manipulation of the standards for consideration of portraiture showed that she had basically lost all perspective and had become, blinded by her passion, by her hatred, by her anger, and that she took it upon herself, because of her position, to call up the lowly artist and just to slam the artist, slam his work, and slam the door in his face. And this is what she did. So it's all documented in my book, Odious and Cerberus, and that's something that you might have seen already, but I'll put it up for your folks there.
Yep.
This is my book, Odious and Cerberus, An American Immigrant's Odyssey and His Free Speech Legal War Against Smithsonian Corruption. She is the antagonist from the beginning of the book, from chapter 1, page 1. She is the person that makes the book have this running theme of this battle. And I ended up suing her the one time. I ended up suing her a second time in 2022, because she then blocked me on Twitter, or X, on the Smithsonian site that had been hijacked. The story is remarkable, David. Unfortunately, corruption exists everywhere. Everywhere there's power in the world, whether it's in a person working at McDonald's who's a manager, anybody that's given a position can become a tyrant in their own world. They can either use the power to serve and to lead and to raise up people, or they can use it to lord it over other people. And it's a human condition. We are all continually, you're tested continually by those things. I think it makes me think of a great quote by Abraham Lincoln, who basically said, if you want to, his first part of the quote was, all men can endure or persevere through adversity. Like all types of people can struggle through and suffer through adversity. But he said, if you really want to know or test a man's heart, find out who he is, give him power.
Yeah.
And it is the litmus test of what they do with it. So she failed, in my opinion, clearly. And then I sued her once, I sued her twice. And the Smithsonian Institution is, and the book is an in-depth historical, legal, personal. It's a bio. It's a spiritual odyssey. There's so many facets. And as an immigrant, a British-born, Spain-raised immigrant to the United States, my journey of coming to America. So the book covers those things for your listeners who are interested to find out. But the Smithsonian is the largest museum complex in the world. It's a massive cultural icon in the United States. It is the American storytelling engine of the United States. It's called America's Attic. Interesting, it was founded by a Brit, James Smithson. Great story there as well in the book. And so, that this whole journey has come about as another sort of symptom, sadly, of corruption, political influence in a museum of great prestige and power. And I'm just a simple guy who was thrown into the mix, but I'm not the type of person to just be quiet when someone tramples you and stamps on your rights or your free speech. And I'm going to say, you know what, this country is built on those values. I'm going to stand up and defend my rights, and I did. And that's what I've been doing. And it's a life-changing experience that's gone on now for 9 years.
And did you say earlier Trump is a defendant in that? What does that mean?
Well, I'm suing him in my latest case.
You're suing Donald Trump?
I'm suing Donald Trump. Yeah, he's part of my most recent, and it's the irony, one of the greatest ironies of the story, that he is the subject of the portrait in 2015, and now he's a defendant in my case. And the reason why, primarily, is that, and this is, and I make it clear, is that his intention, and a lot of what Trump does is, it's sort of like the shotgun approach or the scattergun approach. He just blasts, and his intention is absolutely spot on, even with what he's doing with the Smithsonian Institution. But the problem is that the Smithsonian Institution is a private charity founded by James Smithson, Britain. And the federal government has no place other than they act as trustee. It was Congress, the U.S. Congress, who accepted James Smithson's bequest. His fortune was given to the United States, to the people of the United States, and Congress accepted the trusteeship. So they're just trustee, like of a church or of a charity. The U.S. Congress, not the executive, not the president. The Congress is the trustee of the private Smithsonian Trust. That's all it is. But over the years, it has, through inaction and through corruption and abuse, it has morphed into this confused institution that most people think is actually a government institution, but it's not. That's why it's called Smithsonian. It's named after a private British citizen, has nothing to do with the federal government, or it shouldn't have anything to do with the federal government. But because of time and decay and drift, it has, and the way it's been abused through the years, it's become something that it's not legally. And what the president is doing, although meritorious, socially or politically, meaning because he's going after woke ideology, he's going after the political partisanship in the institution. That is true, because I experienced it myself. But what he's doing is a violation of the law, because he is reaching over into a private institution and trying to tell them what to say. It's like the government, and England is in the midst of this madness right now. The government trying to come into a church and tell the preacher what to preach or what not to preach. The minute you cross that Rubicon and the government starts telling people what they can and cannot say, we have a real problem. And as much as I agree with what he wants to do, the method is illegal. And everyone is sort of there paralyzed by it. They can't do anything. I added him into a case that I was already bringing against the Smithsonian for the third time, because I'm like saying, this needs to be fixed. I agree it needs to be fixed, but this is not the way to do it, because once we cross that Rubicon, then the government is like the executive, the president can just tell everyone what to say, what to think. And it's like, no, this is violating the very fundamental idea of who we are as Americans.
Well, I mean, because we have something obviously going on in the UK at the moment to do with free speech and the trying to introduce digital ID cards that are linked to bank accounts and all of that sort of stuff. It's the thing is, and it's that Rubicon point that you've just made. Once you allow the slight overreach, it extends, and then it becomes an unstoppable force, and so many people in the UK right now just don't understand what this is actually about and where it's come from, and nor do they understand that I think it's Multiverse. I think it's a company that so there is already a company that has effectively been given the task of creating these ID cards, and the company, I think, is either 100% or 50% owned by Ewan Blair, who was the son of Tony Blair, the Prime Minister who originally tried to introduce the ID card, digital ID cards 20 years ago. And you're just like, well, hang on a second. I'm not a mathematician, and nobody would ever say I was the brightest guy in the room. But I can see a couple of dots that are very easy to join up here, and this isn't right.
It's stunning. It's stunning. And what you see going on in the United Kingdom, and obviously I read the British papers, I can see it on social media. It's like we are seeing it here. And the United States has far more guardrails to protect against that. And Americans are much more willing, vocal, and active, even though it's a small percentage, because compared to, I would say, the United Kingdom, you've got it's like the posture of polite British people makes them it cripples them to standing up when these incursions are taking place. I suffer it over here in the US, and it's a very strange thing when you meet up with people who they proclaim that they are constitutionalists or they believe in these things, but if you actually stand up and fight against the violations, you are the violator. I've been treated like that by people, like to say, how dare you do this? And you're like, excuse me? I said, this is the most American thing that I can be doing.
Yeah.
And it's because the apathy and the willingness of people to sit back and take it over and over again till the point where they have lost so much ground that recovery is going to take extreme measures. It's usually what happens. If you read the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson very succinctly defines that condition in human beings, that there is this weakness where we become willing to accept these incursions as long as we keep living.
I think,
and that ends up being the self-defeating condition that they face once those
this is
soldiers
the thing.
knock on the door.
I think one of the problems that Great Britain suffers is like America's history. If you look at the history of America, it's effectively everybody had an opportunity to go out there and stake their claim. Whatever success you had to do it off your own back. Nobody was going to help you. Then we have to overthrow the British oppressors. So there is, and most, not exclusively, but most people who ended up in the United States sort of somewhere from 1700s to the 1900s were likely fleeing poverty or fleeing the law, some form of oppression. So you have a unique group of people with an attitude to pull your socks up and get on with it.
Absolutely.
In Spain and Portugal and Italy in the 20th century, they had to overthrow dictatorships to become to get democracy.
Sure.
In the United Kingdom, we had the class system, and you knew your place and you did as you were told. and we've never, in a weird way, as a country, we've never experienced an oppression. So we don't. I know it sounds.
Other than that,
yeah, and the funny thing is, there's this very noble thing that the UK doesn't get any credit for. That it just picks fights it doesn't have to have. Like, we were the first country in the history of the globe to stand up and say, do you know what, slavery's wrong. We're going to outlaw it in the Commonwealth and United Kingdom nations. But now we're apparently the cause of slavery, not the people that brought it to an end. People don't realise that we were the only country that had nothing to gain by getting involved in World War II. We lost everything by getting involved and defending Poland, and we did it because that was the oath we'd made after World War I, that we made a pledge to stand by our allies, and we were the only ones, because Hitler was never invaded us. We were an island. We could have sat it out, but we'd made a promise that we would join Europe if Germany invaded, and we risked losing everything for a promise. You know, but when it's on our own back door, we're like, don't know how to deal with this. We can fight everyone else's battles but our own, and we're struggling right now. We're struggling, and
it's major. Yeah, and unfortunately, this is what I've learned even over here in the United States, and that is, and I'd put this down. I'm a Christian first. I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm a minister of the gospel. I've been preaching the gospel for 30 years. That is my worldview. England became the United Kingdom because of the Christian worldview that governed the United Kingdom for 1,000 years. You know, since Magna Carta, you can see the massive influence of Christian ideas, thinking, and it comes with all human failures. It's never perfect. It has all sorts of strange expressions or whatever. But at the root of it, at the base of it, there is a set of fundamental ideas that were like a tea bag in a cup of hot water, steeped into the British psyche. And that created a worldview that governed the creation of the value system and the mindset and the character that said, like you just said, we made a commitment to our allies that if this happened, we would do it. And they had the character and the nobility to do what they said and to stand there and because it was the right thing to do. It was right. And that idea and that understanding of right and wrong, that understanding of truth and lie, that was all based on a plumb line of truth that comes ultimately from the Word of God, from the Scriptures. And, with all of the weirdnesses and oscillations that happen through human impact and involvement, still there. What happens, though, and this is what's happened today, is those fundamental ideas have been under attack in the West now for 30, 40, 50 years. The slow erosion of values that has taken place. And like I said, it's this erosion that's taking place slowly, where good people, by and large, are moved slowly with it, rather than sticking a stake in the ground and saying, we're not budging, this is a vie. And this is the problem that I've seen, even, like I said, in the United States, where the Christian or conservative mindset has drifted and been allowed to drift, and yet there's always like a group of people that are up in arms about it. And unfortunately, what happens is that they, rather than, and I wrote about this in my book because it was an observation that I had extensively, that rather than deal with things ongoing and say, no, there's been this capitulation ongoing, and then suddenly there's a massive uproar, and it's usually like a knee-jerk reaction, and those same people explode when they're pushed beyond their point, and it's like, and you see that happening in the United Kingdom now. People are just like, it's madness, and it will provoke an explosion that maybe turns into revolution. You never know, because human beings can only be pushed so far, and the worst part about it is when they have capitulated in using the process to defend their rights for so long, it's like that option is way out of, it's not even an option anymore. They lose the grounds, and then they end up in a place where you say, well, what are you going to do? You're either going to just suck it up, you're either going to be a victim of this madness that's going on, or you're going to stand up and say, that's enough. It's no more. And then you say, well, how do we stand up now? Are we going to litigate? Are we going to use the law? And it's like, well, but if we're beyond that stage, you're going to end up in a hot war. And that is sadly the human condition. And I see it in the United States. I've watched it. I've preached. I have spoken about it. I have been involved in it for 30 years. And the problem sadly exists on the side of those who know better, who don't do anything, who are apathetic, and who are quiet and silent and polite, and their mindset is like cripples them to activity.
Yes,
and then you get the blow up at the end of it.
One of the things that I've noticed, and I've talked about this frequently over the years, and I always call it the pendulum swing, is that the pendulum will swing so far, and
sure.
and everyone's sort of like, well, it's now swinging right. And my concern, or the point I was trying to raise to people, is the problem with the pendulum is you never know when it starts to swing back. So, and when it does swing back, it doesn't ever stop in the middle. And
No.
the people who you could have once had reasonable conversations with, and now we're not talking. And I notice this on social media. When my mum is 73, and as you can imagine, retired, 73. You go to lots of little groups and clubs with all the other retired ladies, the Women's Institute and all that sort of stuff. They post some heavy stuff on social media now about politics. And these are women once upon a time that only ever posted pictures of their dogs and grandchildren. And now they're posting, they're risking getting arrested for some of the stuff they're posting. And, like I said a couple of years ago, the only thing you ever saw them do was post up pictures of their grandchildren. That was, whereas now these people are gone from being bitter, becoming angry. And there gets a point where I always remember a conversation I had many years ago. There's a thing in Somerset every year called the Toll Puddle Marches for the Toll Puddle 7. And they were the people that formed the first ever acknowledged union. They were a group of farm workers in Somerset. They basically were getting really poor wages, so they chained themselves to a tree and refused to work. The corrupt landowner and MP had them arrested under maritime laws, effectively for as if they were in the British Navy, and they were sentenced to Australia. And then some good MPs stepped forward and said, no, you can't do that. That's against the law. And they're considered the first representation of a union where people went on strike for better working conditions. And they were all eventually released. Some came back to the UK, some went to America and stuff like that. The reason I mention this, because my friend who was very left-leaning said it would be good for you to come along, learn a little bit about the other side of people, etc. And we have in the UK a newspaper called The Guardian, which is considered the mainstream left-wing paper. And and while we get there, and while we're there and we're walking through, and you can imagine I would probably consider myself middle of the ground right, and this is probably early noughties. These people are left. And he said, just so you're aware, he said, these people think The Guardian is right wing. And he wasn't wrong. And it was the first time I'd ever seen the opposite side. Like, I was aware of so-called right-wing thugs from football hooliganism, the British National Party and stuff like that in the 80s and the 90s. It was the first time I'd ever been opened up to how radical the left were. And he was like, you're all cut from the same cloth. There's no different.
Sure.
And the reason I mentioned about the pendulum swing is if I have a concern, it's that when it starts to swing back, if it does, or when it swings back, it's not because obviously it won't go to the middle. It's how far right it will go.
Sure. And
that for me,
that is, yeah, and that is absolutely the observation that I have, and that is, and the extreme is unfortunately the case, because those people that have sat idle for so long, they don't respond. It's such a blow up reaction that it produces the extreme. And it's just unfortunately, the natural way of human beings. It's not the ideal, and it's not the measured way that we would hope. I'm someone that's always pursuing dialogue, and I'm at a point now where, it's very sad that there is no. It's like we're at the detente now, where there is no in a relationship. You're at the place where there is no dialogue anymore, and maybe it starts again, maybe it doesn't. But I have seen it and observed it and researched it long enough to know, I believe, where we are right now. And rightly, as you said, that pendulum swing is happening, and it will, and there's nothing to stop it going all the way the other direction, because the people that are pushing, and many times it's human passions, it's unguarded, it's unfettered by law, it's unfettered by reason, because passion and anger and these strong emotions have taken over, and it's now blinding any sort of reason. So it is what's, I think, the saddest part, because you look at what we have been given and what was paid for by the sacrifices of soldiers and in World War II or World War. We look at the freedoms that we were given by these immense sacrifices, and those liberties and freedoms were they were left unchecked. Or we're free, we just sort of go on, throw our arms and let it.
Yeah.
And what happened is then the decay happened. They sat there and did nothing, and all the little encroachments. See, this is what happens. The decay happens slowly. We'll just let it. And people don't do. And I was always, even in the church settings, I was saying, well, how in the world? What the heck? Is that not clear to? It's okay. It's all right.
I always tell people the problem with cliches is we forget they had a real meaning, and that's where give somebody an inch, they'll take a mile, and that's what it meant. It literally meant you give up that boundary, and somebody will put in a new one, and
that's it. And that's what and so the question, and I've had this conversation recently with other people, obviously, and you say this, you say I'm someone, I believe in the system, I believe in the rule of law. I'm litigating for that reason. I believe that, and hope that my litigation will have an effect that will restrain the behavior that caused me to litigate, that's a legitimate, this is the way we do it. But unfortunately, I'm like a minority, because I don't, social media and that, I might go on and I make a post once I don't go on. I can't, I love to dialogue. I love to listen. I love to learn from other people. I listen to people I disagree with. I want to people that I don't, I want to hear the worst and the most extreme other side of the argument to test what I believe, and to say, it's a real, and then, but conversation with people who are so blinded on both sides now by their passion, they don't want to hear, they don't want to reason, and that's where you then say the system that we have now, sadly, becomes inadequate to solve it, and they will continually be frustrated and possibly reach a point where they snap, and they said, and then there's no turning back. And that happened in the United States. They said to the United Kingdom, if you read the Declaration of Independence, it was a legitimate appeal to righteousness. It was an appeal to God. It was an appeal for justice. It was an appeal to law. It was an appeal to the British law, British system of. It was an appeal in every way, but at every turn, the appeal was rejected, and then men are left, and he says it there. They're left with no recourse now.
Yeah.
But to say we're not going to be friends anymore, and we're going to put that. So in the U.S., I've thought about many times what I would call the moral migration, where you see it happening. You see people of different creeds and ideologies drifting towards the South or towards Texas, towards Florida. You see a lot of movement. And I thought about India and Pakistan and the way that you had this entire nation basically not split in half, but you had people who were Muslim pack up, and there's a video of you see them walking on a road, this group going this way, and on the same road there's a million people walking by each other. They're just swapping countries. We may experience something like that in the United States, like a national divorce, that before bloodshed happens, you reach a place where people just say, well, we cannot live. We have nothing in common anymore. They've rejected the fundamental Christian values that held us together. Those things don't exist anymore for them.
I think
there's no longer reality, and so the only recourse is separation. There's no longer any reason to try to be friends, and that's the sad part. It's real.
I think there's a couple of things that are going to be interesting, and I genuinely have no prediction. And this applies to both the United States and the UK. If as the polls suggest, I don't think we get an election for about another 4 years, maybe 5 years. Nigel Farage, as it currently stands, would wipe the floor with Labour, and he would win. He would win if the current polls are correct, and by a margin. The problem is there are already people coming forward, Rupert Lowe being one of them, Tommy Morrison being another. Nigel Farage isn't going to do enough. So you could end up with Nigel Farage in power, and his two main oppositions are even more right. Right.
Well, that's
yeah. And I have the same idea about America, because
sure.
I think one of the worst things about the way they've gone for Donald Trump is they only attack him and not a policy. And I've no skin in the game. I think if I was honest, I'd have voted for Trump or the Republicans. But I don't live in the United States, so it's kind of, it's throwing cards at the wall. What do I know? I don't live there.
Sure.
I think,
but the issues remain the same for you.
Yeah,
you are.
Yeah. But
right.
Is if Donald Trump sees out his term, which God willing he will, I think J.D. Vance will probably replace him. If that popularity that Trump has, and with the sadness that went with Charlie Kirk, who was very good friends with J.D. Vance, if that follows over to J.D. Vance, you're going to have a very conservative Christian president, and you won't be able to attack him on his personality like they do with Donald Trump, because one of the great things that Donald Trump does is he deflects, like you say, with that scattergun approach, what he's actually doing by things he says. You won't get that with J.D. Vance, and you'll only be able to attack him on policies. And again, and I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing. I don't. It's just, if I was making a prediction, that's kind of the direction, which is contradicting what I just said. That's what I would see happening, and I think America could become incredibly conservative again.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. And it is the natural course of things. And again, the sad part about it is that there's many things that you would want to see happen like that, but you can only sort of see a few things or be part of a few things maybe, but the big picture is so much bigger that you get a lot of stuff that you're like, oh my goodness, I did not bank on that, and I did not want that, and this is
Yeah.
I did not want to be part of this. And I found myself like that today in a political wilderness where you're just like, I am not affiliated. I am like I said, a wanderer politically in that sense, and you never thought that that it would be like that. But if you love the truth and you love justice, and if you love your fellow man, you see, this is the other part that people fall victim to, is that as myself as a Christian, my calling first and foremost is to love my fellow man.
Yeah.
And if politics makes me adverse to my fellow man, regardless of creed or religion or whatever they are, then you have a real problem, because now you're in conflict with your faith as a Christian. And what these people do is they twist then, and they force Jesus into their twisted ideology, because they become consumed with hatred. And the minute the human heart is poisoned by hatred and masquerading as right or righteousness, then you have a perversion of the original idea. And that's where I departed from many of these people and involvement. I said, I have nothing to, this is never what I intend, not what I want to be part of. I refuse to be part of that, because at the end of the day, politics is very important. But our love of our fellow man in God's eyes is more important, because it's the love your neighbor as yourself. It's all of the golden commands of Christ are enshrined in our lives when we allow ourselves to interact with our fellow man in that same way, and we don't bend those rules because we do not like a certain group of people. You can be righteous politically. You can have political policy and laws and enforcement of laws that is righteous, that is firm, that is God honoring, that does not trample the rights of people, protects your nation and gives you independence and all. There's always, but it's the minute, like I was talking to my wife last night, she asked me, because she doesn't keep up with the news. She's busy doing her thing with taking care of her mom and this. And she goes, well, I've been reading about the ICE agents in like Chicago. And I said, well, first of all, you're probably reading some news thing it's like all twisted. You can't go on that. And I said, the way that I see it is this. It's now so easy to point your finger at law enforcement enforcing laws and say, oh, how terrible and how mean. And you're like, well, hold on, let's start at this point. The people that are responsible, firstly, are the government officials for the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years who have turned a blind eye to law enforcement and have permitted this to happen in the first place.
Yeah.
They're the first.
It's always been illegal.
It's always been. And the second responsibility is with the person themselves who broke the law. And now they came here illegally and they built a life illegally, and suddenly the laws like snaps back into place and boom, they're being snatched off the streets. Yeah, well, it looks terrible. And it's on a humanistic level, oh my goodness, how traumatic for their family. But you know what? You broke the law. And the government is deciding to enforce it like this, and nobody can complain about that, because what do you want to do? You want to now tell them how they need to go around and do their job, as you sat silently for all those years and did nothing. You didn't legislate, you didn't petition, you didn't try to have the laws enforced, nothing. It's the same problem. They did nothing for so long, and now everybody's mean because of they're enforcing the law. It's like, you know what? It's very sad. Good people are being swept up in it. American citizens are being caught up in it, because the exercising of law like this is, again, like a scattergun. And people, there's now victims of all shapes and sizes. But that's the problem. And the problem is these people let it happen for all these years. That's who you should be blaming. All the past presidents and senators and congressmen that did nothing, or did it, or deliberately turned a blind eye to get cheap labor for profit. Their greed blinded them.
As you said that, I remember sending an email to my local MP. It was around about 2016, because it would have been Brexit related. And his name was John Glenn. He's still the MP for Salisbury, but no longer my MP, because they conveniently changed the boundaries. And I wrote an email to him then saying, and I remember quoting Tommy Robinson, this is 9 years ago, that if you don't start listening to what he's talking about, he's going to become effectively, they're going to be the people that you have to fight against. And that was back in the day when I didn't know much about Tommy Robinson and just considered him a racist, you know. And judging by the amount of lawsuits he's won against the Metropolitan Police for false arrest, again, I'm not sure. I'm not saying he doesn't have racist tendencies or doesn't have the capacity to be racist, but then that's no more than you and I. It's how we check our prejudices, which is how we're judged. But it turns out he's nowhere near as racist as he was once painted. But I remember effectively the MP telling me to wind my neck in and not be so stupid. And here we are 9 years later, and I'm like, told you so. You know, there isn't a single person that had listened to.
It is so sad, and it's so sad because the damage that happens to the people that their lives are suddenly uprooted. They pay the price. They pay the price for breaking the law. They pay the price for the people that allow them to do it. And you're like, and then the president, and ICE or the Nazis and all that, and you're like, they're doing their job.
Yeah.
They're enforcing the laws that are on the books. These are laws. You don't like the way they're enforcing them. I get it. Yeah, well, you know what? You had a chance, and now you're just going to have to look and see how it's done. It's human nature, and we see the worst of it. And this probably will take place in the United Kingdom because it's the same problem that's happened over there. And it's insanity. It's like, how come they don't understand this? How come they can't see it? You just and the worst part about it that you see, and I've seen it in the United States, is when they put American citizens last. They put veterans last. And they're suddenly catering to people that have no right to be here in the first. And you're like, what type of insanity is this? What type of and I share my story with you. I was illegal in the United States, just so I know this. When I came to America the first time, I came as a tourist, and my goal was to go to South America as a missionary for 3 months. And once my visa expired, it didn't happen, and I stayed. And my visa, and I tried to fix it. I went to lawyers. This one lawyer in California, he says, "Yeah, give me $10,000 and I'll get you a wife, and you can have an illegal marriage, basically, and then divorce her after 6 months, and you keep." And I'm like, I just not gonna do that. I didn't have the money anyway, but even if I did, I'd never do that. It's just not who I am. But the point is that I went through this living in the shadows for 2 years, and eventually, when I fell in love with my bride, my wife to be, then it was, you could get married, and I said, yeah, but that's then her parents were already accusing me of marrying her for her green card. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. And what did I do? I self-deported. I packed my bags. I went to the INS, the immigration building in New York City, and I handed myself in. And I said, because as a Christian, I said, my friends would say, Romans 13, it's like you need to be subject to Caesar. You need to obey the law of the land. And I said, I know, and I'm trying to, but I can't. And they said, well, you can. You just got to pack up and leave. And I said, you're right. And I humbled myself, and I said, you're right. And it was the hardest thing that I could have done, because I could have run off to Las Vegas and married my bride and try to force to get my paperwork and all this. I said, that would have been part of my story. And what did I do? I went and handed myself in. They laughed at me when I did. And I was with Gloria and my pastor at the time, and the agents, they laughed. They said, no one's ever done this before.
Yeah.
And I went to the office and I said, here I am. And I was basically saying to them, listen, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I've overstayed my welcome. I was illegally in your country, and I'm going to leave now. And they said, well, yeah, we want you to leave. And they said they may even stamp your passport with a 5-year no return when you leave. And I dreaded that, but they didn't, thank God. But I left. And eventually 6 months later, I came back legally, and I came back with a visa, and I got married legally, and it was respecting the law of the land. And today that's my story. And so I understand this whole dynamic personally. And point is that, are we going to show respect to these people, this country, and these hosts, this family that has welcomed me in? And America is very welcoming. They're always welcome, and they then come and take advantage like a bad guest in your home.
Well, this because I've had this argument with people before because I got into trouble with the law in my late 20s, and America has a policy of you can't come into the country if you're a criminal. And
Sure.
And it was 2019. I looked into it a little bit, and you can actually go make an appointment with the embassy and apply and say I'd like to come to your country, and I went, and there's a lot of hoops you got to jump through, and it's probably equivalent of about $500 by the time you've paid to get there and paid for the visa, if not a bit more, with no guarantees. But I did. I went and explained what happened. I went and explained who I've become and where I am now in my life, and the lady at the other side was like, okay, I don't have an issue with who you are today. I think you're not going to be a problem for America. I will approve this. It will go to my supervisor. If he approves it, it will get sent to Washington, and if they approve it, they will decide on the visa. About 3 months later, I got an email, comes back and says, yep, we think you can come to the country. And they issued me a 5-year B1, B2 visa, which I only got to use once because we then went into lockdown and it ran out. But I was honest about them. I was honest about this. I didn't try to get in there on a sneaky passport. I didn't try to get in there and pretend that I didn't have something that might backfire on me, because I do intend next year to apply again and see if I can get another visa. I'm hoping that because they've already given me one, they'll be like, the same process, but it should be much more straightforward. But yeah, exactly that, because I'd have just spent all of my time looking over my shoulder. Because what if somebody realises that I have a criminal record? What if I've said, and instead I did it the right way, and America welcomed me. Well, ironically, when I got to San Francisco, they detained me. This guy was just like, and I was like, I'm surfing. He's like, but you've got a business visa. I said, well, it's a tourist and business visa. It's my first time I'm coming here as a tourist. And he was like, oh, right, okay, yeah. And he called somebody over who took me to the back room and they detained me. And the funny thing is, it's exactly like you see on the Discovery channels when you're in this room with all these other people that have been detained and you're not really allowed to talk. And I wasn't allowed to message my friend, and obviously we had to go elsewhere. We had to go and pick up an RV, so we missed all of that. He has no idea where I am. He's just going to assume I've been detained because there's no outside contact, and trust me, you do not want to be seen using your phone in there. And after a couple of hours, I went up to the counter and sort of like, excuse me, sir, very sorry. Is it possible that I can just contact my friend and let him know that I've been detained? No, you can't. But if I haven't got to you in about half an hour, come up to the counter again, please. So,
sure.
Any 29 minutes later, he calls me up to the counter, and he looks through my file, and I explained to him what happened, and he just went, "Yep, I've no idea why he detained you anyway." Stamped my passport and said, "Welcome to America," and then gave me some good surfing spots to try out. And he's just like, "Go through that door, please."
The United States has been, and most people that I have encountered has been totally different to what it's portrayed as in the United Kingdom or in Spain, where I grew up. But yeah, play by the book, play by the rules, and you're genuinely in a good spot now. Like I said, with my whole story of litigation, I played by the rules, and I meet this a tyrant in office, and then you use the system to vindicate your rights, and that's what I've been doing. So unfortunately, like I said, we are at a time in our human experience where uncertainty is certainly present, and we do not know what tomorrow will look like. You never do, really. But like I say to most people, and as a person of faith, when you have your eternity and your eternal destination sorted out, it really doesn't matter, because your hopes, your dreams, your aspirations for the real life are in God, in a realm that is not this world. We're just passing through, and it's an amazing level of freedom that you get, because so many people, if you don't have that eternal perspective, you can only look at what you're seeing, and it's driving people up the wall. Whereas I'm looking beyond it, saying, yeah, this is what it is, and maybe it goes this way, maybe it goes this way, and I just want to make sure that I keep on my path because I'm going up and over. And that's the encouragement to you and your listeners, because ultimately the gospel of Jesus Christ is where mankind finds the ultimate answer. And that's the only reason that for my life that makes sense of the world we live in. The scripture is very clear. We're not promised anything except what we're seeing in the world today. The Bible is very clear about it. We see the condition of the world described 2,000 years ago. It's nothing new. And yet we have the greatest hope ahead of us for those who do believe that, it just anchors your eternal destiny beyond this world, and it changes the way you live. It changes your perspective, and it makes sense of the chaos that we may be going through, because you're not hoping that suddenly this world is going to get better, or you have no guarantees, and you don't put your hopes in it because you can't, because all you're going to be doing is getting let down. It doesn't mean we don't try. We get busy. We work like a great quote by the great Protestant reformer, and his name just jumped out of my head. I'll remember it in a second. Martin Luther, the great German reformer.
Yep.
His quote was, "If I knew that the world was going to end tomorrow, I'd still plant my apple tree today." And that's the perspective that I think the Christian faith gives me, and that's how I live my life.
And that would be a perfect place to stop. Thank you very much for your time. Just before you go, quickly, where can people find you and your books?
The litigation about the Smithsonian is at my website, which is called smithsoninstitution.com. Not Smithsonian, because James Smithson is the founder. This is smithsoninstitution.com. There you can find my book and my story and litigation and the whole 9 yards. It's a very complete site like that. My artwork is julianraven.com, and that's just my paintings and the non-political aspect of my life. So julianraven.com, and also if you want to read what I write ongoing, I have a Substack at Julian Raven, The Voice in the Wilderness, and that's Substack. So those are the best places to find me. And maybe another time, David, we'll catch up and see how things are going.
I'd love to do that. Thank you very much. And there you have it. That was Julian and ourselves. And something I mentioned to Julian, if you want to look up the politics in the UK today, look up the Fabian Society and how many previous members in the Labour Party and what it stands for. But apart from that, please do check out Julian. Look into what he's done, where he's going. And he and I just chatted afterwards for a bit, and he was very gracious and said a prayer for me. And we're going to chat some more late November, early December, hopefully. And I've put all the links in the description, so please do look him up and enjoy him some more. And as always, wherever you're from, whatever you believe, do please take care and be blessed. Thank you very much.